This is the Domain Magnate Show, where you'll learn everything you need to know about buying, optimizing, and selling online businesses with your host, Michael Bereslavsky.
Hello and welcome. This episode is about understanding and reading P&Ls, profit and loss statements. And at the end of this, you should learn what a P&L is, how it works, and really be able to understand how to read it and also what to pay attention to so you can learn more about the business you're reviewing. And this is intended for beginners mostly, new buyers and investors. So first of all, what is a P&L? A P&L is a profit and loss statement, which for online business just lists the different sources of revenues and expenses. And that allows you to get a quick look of what this business is all about. And so let me show you a quick example. And this is one of the smallest businesses that we have at Domain Magnate, a website called arabic-keyboard.online, and you can visit it to have a quick look. So by looking at this P&L, you can quickly learn a lot about the business. First of all, you can see that there is two sources of income, Amazon Associates and AdSense, Google AdSense. And then you can see that the expenses are the domain registration, the hosting, and some content and links. That's the first thing that you can see. And then the net profits. So you would see that most of the revenue is coming from AdSense, while a little bit extra is from Amazon. And then you can also see that there is some fixed hosting cost, fixed domain registration cost of $10 every month, like the hosting is $5 every month, and that the content and links were done about 1.5 years ago and have not been done anything recently. So that's the most simple kind of P&L that you would have, and that gives you a very quick idea, a quick snapshot of the business. Another important thing that you can do with this is look at the averages quickly. So with Google Sheets, what you can generally do is, for example, select the last 3 months of profits, and then it will show you the sum, or if you click it will show the average. So you can see the average is $50 in the last 3 months. You can do the same, for example, for 12 months. And for the last 12 months, you can see here it says count 12, so 12 months, and the average is $57. So that's good to know. Now that's the most basic profit and loss statement there is. And this kind of gives you an idea of what the lines and what everything is about. Now, next, let's look at a more complicated example, and then we'll see what we can learn from it. And you can actually learn a lot from a P&L. You can learn a lot about the history of the business. You can understand the potential risks and potential things to pay attention to. You can understand how it works for looking at expenses and sources of income. And there is a few more things that you should keep in mind that are a little bit more advanced that we'll cover in a bit. So let us look at another P&L statement that is a little bit more advanced. And here it is. This is one of our portfolio businesses, and you can see the URL is hidden so that we can preserve the privacy. And so let's dive into it and see what we can see. First of all, we are looking at the revenue sources. And you see that we have AdSense, Stripe, PayPal 1, PayPal 2, and some affiliate income. We also have the different operating expenses, the domain registration, which is like $10 per year, the hosting bill, which is about $35 recently, And then we have the Stripe refund fees, and PayPal fees and some APIs, some development, and also content and links and paid ads. And so here is how you can actually learn from this. By looking at how all these different lines interact with each other. So, for example, you might notice that PayPal one, at some point, this was apparently discontinued. There are no more revenues on PayPal one from January 2000, and the PayPal 2 was added, started generating more and more revenues beginning June 2019. So what that tells us is probably the PayPals were switched, and what usually means that maybe the business was sold. And this is actually true because this is a business we own, so I know about it. And we actually acquired it in June 2019. And as we acquired it, we put our PayPal instead of the previous owner's PayPal. And so that's something you can actually deduce quite quickly from the P&L. So that's quite neat, right? And you can see that the previous PayPal was discontinued, so it probably had some subscriptions that were incoming until then. Then you can also see that most of the revenue is coming from Stripe, and it's been like that throughout the history of the business. You can also see that it's been very consistent. The revenues appear to be very consistent. The expenses seem to be quite consistent. And consistency is great. It's very nice to see in a business, especially when you have it over a period of more than 2 years here. Let's see what else we can learn. Another thing that I often pay attention to when looking at P&Ls is seasonality. Is this business seasonal? And that's easy to see by seeing if there are some periods during the year that the revenue is substantially lower or substantially higher. So here, for example, we see higher revenue in past couple months, but that wasn't like that last year. Actually, there is So last, it's kind of a mistake here. That should be like 2021. Yeah. So the last year, the revenue was not higher in February and March. It was kind of similar. And the year before as well, it was similar. So that's not seasonal. So we don't see any repeated patterns that repeat consistently over a year. So it doesn't look like there is any seasonality. Then next, we can look at some inconsistencies or irregularities. So there is a few numbers that come to mind. For example, this one, you can see that in December, the AdSense income was only $341 compared to close to $1,000 in the months following it and in the previous month. So that means something happened. Maybe the owner was testing removing AdSense, replacing it or something like that. Or maybe there was some temporary AdSense compliance issue or a ban or something like that. So that's something you can usually investigate and ask the owner. Another inconsistency that comes to mind here is around this period, you can see that in October, November, December, the revenue in PayPal account was lower. It was like 800, 600, 900 compared to the months before and after. It was more than 1,000 or 1,500. And that's also interesting. So potentially this is because the owner decided to use PayPal less and redirect more sales to Stripe, because you can see that the Stripe sales were consistent. Let's see what else we can learn from here. Also, of course, we should pay a lot of attention into the general revenue trends. And we see the general revenue trends are quite consistent. It's been averaging like $3,000-4,000 per month for a couple of years. And then recently it went up to 5,000. And more recently, even 6,000 and 7,000 in revenue. So that's pretty good to know. But that's also interesting. It's helpful to understand what caused this increase. In this case, I can tell you that this was caused by improving the technology, because this is a SaaS business, and by increasing traffic. So next, let's have a look at the expenses. Of course, the domain, the hosting expenses are consistent, but then we have a Stripe refunds. And something that jumps to mind here is this number. So these numbers are a lot higher than the other numbers. In July and August 2000, the business had more than $1,000 in Stripe refunds. So we would like to know what caused that. And also we see some negative Stripe refunds, which means that the refunds were reversed. So that's something to also look into and find out about. And in this case, I can tell you that this was due to a technical error on the site, that people were charged twice, so they were higher refunds. So as you can see, a lot of those things you could kind of deduce from the P&L. So the P&L tells you a lot of information. It can tell you a whole story. Same you can see with PayPal refunds. PayPal refunds inconsistent. There is also some API, Twilio, IP stock. The expenses seem consistent. A little bit higher recently, which seems reasonable because there is more revenue as well. Next, we can look at development and support. We see there are some costs from over a year ago, but there are no costs recently. So that could be a little suspicious, because you'd want to find out what happened, because SaaS projects, technological projects, will usually require some frequent maintenance. So you might want to check if there are really no problems recently, or maybe the owner just didn't include the details in the spreadsheet. Also, you can see there are some content and links expenses. And this one is really important to understand, because you see they are not quite consistent. So they were like 700, 600 in February and March 2019, and then some more in October 2019, a little bit in February, and then like April, May, and June. So it seems that occasionally the owner was paying for some more content and expenses and links to be added. And what you can deduce from that is that you could probably expect something similar. You could probably expect that you might have to spend like more or less a similar amount, 700, 600 every 6 months or so. And it seems that recently there were no expenses for links and content. And finally, you can look at the paid ads here, the last column. And this shows you basically that they probably started using paid ads around March 2000. And they tested a little bit, and then it looks like it probably worked well. So they tested a bit more. And in September, October 2000 was higher. But then recently, it looks like it was discontinued. So that kind of tells you the story that they've experimented with it, but then decided not to continue using it because it probably wasn't as profitable. And that's about it. And finally, what you can also do is look at the averages. So if you, for example, you can like look at the average for the last 3 months, and that's been 5,832, yeah. Or the average of the past 12 months, which would be 12, which would be 4,747. And so these are basically some things that you can learn from the P&L. You can also look at the totals, but the totals are usually not as interesting. Although we can notice that the past 2 and something years, the business earned around more than 114,000. and it had 18,000 expenses. So you can see from that the expenses are roughly like 10% of the revenues, like 10-12% of the revenues. So that's it. That's the review of the P&L. And what we've learned from that is that the P&L is very important. It's very important to look at it carefully because it really tells you a story. You can learn a lot about a business from just reviewing a P&L. What I usually pay the most attention to in a P&L is, first of all, looking at revenue sources and sources of expenses. Then looking at trends. Do you see specific expenses or revenue sources going up or going down? And what does that tell you? And is that consistent or is it a fluke? Understand the whole business history and trends of the past years or whatever long you have the P&L for. And at Domain Magnate, we always ask to see previous history. So sellers, owners often only show the last 12 months or even the last 6 months. And we always ask to see as long as possible of revenue history because we can always learn more from it. Also pay attention to trends, to expenses, see if there is any seasonality. Pay attention to any irregularities or inconsistencies with numbers. And you can also understand some things about risks from looking at the P&Ls. For example, if you see that there is only one major source of revenue, that would be potentially a risk if something happened to it. Or if you see that there is some inconsistent source of expenses that sometimes can be quite high. So that's something to pay attention to. Additionally, when I look at the P&L, I often ask myself, how reasonable is it? How reasonable are those expenses and those revenues compared to the traffic, compared to the business? So, for example, quite often you would see that owners, especially for smaller businesses, owners don't put most of the expenses in the P&L sheet. So as the buyer or investor, for you, it's important to understand better what are some extra expenses you might expect for this business. If it's a technical business, it might be some support or coding, programming, development expenses. If it's a content business, you'll probably expect to update content quite often, or maybe even pay to build some links. Any content site needs frequent content updates. If it's an e-commerce business, there would also be the specific expenses relevant to that industry. So now that you have a pretty good understanding of what a P&L is and how it works, I suggest that you look at more websites and look at more and more different P&Ls and see what you can learn from that. And the more experience you gain, the faster you'll be able to catch on different trends and inconsistencies and problems, as well as opportunities. Thank you for watching and wish you good luck in your next acquisition.
Domain Magnate is a leader in buying and selling online businesses with a proven track record of expertise gained from over 300 deals since 2004. To learn more about how we can help you acquire or exit a profitable online business today, head over to domainmagnate.com for more details.